All right. Well, thank you very much for coming today for this briefly workshop, how to write a proper developer grant for ICP. Daniel, Bruno, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here. And if you guys can give a small introduction about yourselves, that will be great. Daniel, why don't you start first?
All righty. Hi, my name is Daniel McCoy. I've been programming and building on the internet computer since slightly after Genesis. I've been involved in numerous larger and smaller projects, as well as with the Outpost Metaverse and with the Swap Multimedia Company. And I have completed or have been a part of numerous developer grants and on grant teams. So I'm happy to lend a hand with helping smaller teams, newer teams, and even larger teams complete and fill out successful developer grants.
Awesome, thank you. And today we have also special guest, Bruno, who is ICP Hub co-founder for Indonesia. Hello, Bruno. Thank you for coming as well. So we got some questions for you, Daniel. Daniel, so when I talk to startups, I usually start a conversation. Please read this blog from Definity Officials, how to write a proper grant. I am not sure how many people are reading that, but it's there's I'm sorry, there's a clear instructions there how to write, but sometimes the blog does not help. So let's start from the beginning. How big is a grant should look like when they're written?
Well, there's three typical grant sizes that they offer on the application, which is 5, 25, and 100,000. The 5 is typically 2 milestones and can be thought about as a 50% milestone, and then the 100% either release of a tooling, a small app, or a small tool. The 25,000 is, from what I've seen, typically the most common, and that is a 5,000 milestone, a 10,000, and a 10,000. So you should typically think 20% for the first milestone. You should think 20% of the way through, maybe just the starting of the app, the framework, and a couple of basic utilities or functions. And then the second milestone, you should think about 50 to 60% of the way through. And then the third milestone would be your 100% of the way through. And then at the 100,000, it is 4 milestones split in 25,000 each. Normally, those are extensive grants. After a 25,000, you can have your grant extended. If you do land 100,000, then you should think, the typical 25, 50, 75 to 100% completion when you're writing your milestones. I have done both 25s and 100s. I've filled out successful applications for both. The best chance at getting one is typically start with a 25,000 for a larger program. And your first milestone, really, you should think create your front end, create your back end, and let that be create your documentation on your GitHub repo and let that be your first milestone. Your second milestone, add your necessary functionalities like your utilities, your core functions, your logins, your stuff that makes it, that gives it you full utility. And then your last milestone, you should think releases, beta testing, extensive functionalities, security, clean up the user interface, make it more of an MVP style program. What a lot of teams miss, though, and there's an important piece to this, is that the grant program is designed to, yes, it's designed to assist developers and teams with their development by funding them to help build things on the network, but it's also to give the network more functionality. So typically I've found that there's a trade-off between what developers want to build and what the network and the ecosystem wants to see. And this is where it gets less about the milestones and more about selling your grant idea to them. in the form of writing the rest of the application. So the milestones are important. You should add a bunch in there. But the thing they're looking for is they're looking for stuff that helps the ecosystem and the users on it directly, either adding utility or adding infrastructure and tooling. So if you're thinking about, say, a $25,000 grant or even 100,000, you might want to you might want to take a center point between both. You might want to try to build your app and then also provide open source tooling that other developers in the ecosystem can use to build similar frameworks. And in this way, you're giving the grant committee and the ecosystem and the community something as well as the users of the network while still fulfilling your goal. So it's sort of a trade-off, but I've learned that by providing more open source tooling, more GitHub documentation, and more outreach for the programs, instead of creating monetizable apps, games, and platforms, has oftentimes seen more grant success.
Okay, thank you. How long does it usually take to developers to create for startup to code for 5K, 25, and 100? Like how many? There is a GitHub commits, right? And this is the hours that they put in. How long does it usually take for startup?
So I would say for a 5,000, it really depends on your milestones and the complexity of it. For me personally, I've worked with a lot of different pieces of the internet computer, the ledger canister, NFTs, tokens, a lot of asset canister stuff. So it really depends on what developers are coming here. If they're new, if they're experienced, it depends on how long it's going to take them to pick up the specific part of the framework they're looking to build on. But 5,000 should really only take a month or two of maybe full-time work. I mean, honestly, probably a month if you're a good developer and you can pick up on things quickly. 25,000 is typically a 3 to 5 month long thing, depending on the team and their experience. And 100,000, I would like to say between 5 and 7 or 8 months, because you really want to give some extra time. Things happen sometimes. There's setbacks, there's barriers, it's new technology. You're going to run into things that you might not expect to run into when developing on these platforms. A lot of the tooling is alpha beta still. So if you run into things you're not expecting to run into, not only is Dfinity right there to help you, if you reach out to them, they will help you. But also, it sometimes takes a little bit more time than you expect. During the grant meeting, and also I believe on the application, they will ask you how long you believe that the milestones you wrote will take. But I would say on average, 5,000 would be 1 month, 25,000 would be about 3, and 100,000 should be about 6 if you have a good enough team.
Thank you. How when the startup does not have a developer and they cannot write developer grant, of course. When they start looking for developers, where is the best way for them to look for developers? Besides, we're going to help them as a hubs to find the developers, but should they go to the Dfinity forum?
I would say the Dfinity forum is a great place to stop. Obviously, Twitter in the IC community, making a post, asking some of the OGs in the ecosystem if they know anybody or if they're open to work. There's a lot of us still laying around here. There's a lot of people that are interconnected, such as the OG teams like Discover, District, Tonic Labs, myself and Kyle the Swap. There's a lot of us that are pretty connected with the rest of the ecosystem, and we're always happy to help people find developers. But also there are people that will help train the developers if they need to pick something up. There's a ton of open source code, documentation, and things out there to help new developers get acquainted easily with the current frameworks that are available for developing on the internet computer. But if looking, I would say developer forum, Twitter, and also the Dfinity Dev Discord. There is a spot in the Dfinity developers Discord to reach out to people who may be open for open work.
What do you think right now is ecosystem needs the most? What kind of dapps?
I would say, honestly, full stack developers like front end and back end developers. But really, I think it's more pinpointed toward looking at what are the weak points of the ecosystem right now for development. And this is, in my opinion, what would increase chances of getting grants is infrastructure. There's plenty of games and platforms that will be built over the period of time, and a lot of teams will come and go to build those things. But the infrastructure and open source tooling is going to be needed for other developers to use to build those apps, games, and platforms. So when you come to think of grants, I've found the most success in providing infrastructure or tooling for other developers. So really, I guess it would depend on the what is the aim of the team that is going for the grant? What are they trying to build, and what are they offering the ecosystem?
Okay, is it usually infrastructure can be potentially monetized and turned into the business, or is it going to be only, one-time infrastructure to build from a grant and then they have to move on? Because I've been talking to some developers and they're telling me that if you're building a tooling, you cannot monetize it and run this as a business for the future. Is it correct or?
I think that both can be done. I think that if you build the tooling and provide the tooling as open source to the rest of the community on GitHub for other developers to see and to use, but you also use that tooling that you built or the infrastructure to build an application or a platform, you can monetize the application or the platform. Sure, you might not be able to sell the tooling because you open sourced it in exchange for a grant, but then you could use the grant funding to build your application and platform into a monetizable business structure, which has been seen numerous times around the ecosystem since Genesis. But it's usually a sense of a trade-off from what I've seen, which is you provide some open source tooling, use that tooling, build your app or whatever your team is aiming to build. It's the best chance of success, in my opinion, for a grant.
So does the grant needs to, you said before that the developers also, milestones are important, but also developers on the papers, they need to sell their project, right? So
Yes.
should they include a paragraph, how this is going to benefit ICP ecosystem?
Yes. So the grant application comes with a preset list of questions that are designed specifically to explain that to the grant committee, so that when they go through their review and approval process, that they can understand the full scope of the project, not only from a technical standpoint and what it offers the ecosystem for developers, but also what it offers in general and what they should expect the end vision and goal to be for the project. So you'll see questions like who will use this tooling or this platform? What is your target demographic? How do you think, what are the different ways you think this platform will be used? And what benefit does this provide to the ecosystem and its users, developers, or otherwise?
What should not be stated on the application?
I think it depends on the team and the platform that they're trying to build. So obviously you're welcome to trade secrets. As a business or a team, you don't want to be giving away your trade secrets. They don't expect everything to be open source, but the more you're willing to give out on GitHub, in my opinion, the better chance you're going to have of approval. Because at the end of the day, in my opinion, that's really what's being paid for. But you are welcome to kind of choose the level of information you give. to the grant committee through the application as to what should and shouldn't be said about your app or your pitch in such a sense. But I think really there's not a lot of don'ts besides don't hold too much back. If you're too light on your milestones, or if you're too vague, such as not being enough of not having enough development knowledge to actually write the grant, then I've seen a lot of grants get turned down and even get told specifically to seek help from a developer writing the grant because they want to see, they want to hear more about the technical side of a lot of things. So if you're too vague in your application when explaining the rest, or outside of the milestones, then you have a higher chance of being turned down for a grant, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah, I have a couple startups like that. So what is your thoughts for right now lots of blockchains have donations, and people are trying to build donations on the blockchains as a business type. Would it be startup considered for the grant for donation?
I guess it would depend on, in my opinion, for something like that, it would depend on the tooling they're offering. If they plan on open sourcing the framework so other people can build applications and platforms off of it, I would say they have a higher chance of acceptance.
Okay. Bruno, do you have from your side any questions that might be interest of yours to ask?
Yeah, Daniel, thank you so much. I think it's amazing everything that you are been sharing until now. I think it's going to be super useful for whoever is going to listen or read to everything that you shared for now. I had one question regarding your previous reply. So if, for example, let's imagine I am a startup, I'm new, but I'm very interested in building on the IC ecosystem because I see the potential. I love the unique features, the reverse gas fee model, the fact that it's very cheap for storing data, it's a sustainable blockchain. So there is a lot of things that are appealing to me, and I'm deciding as the founder of this startup, hey, I want to build on the IC instead of building on Ethereum, Cardano, Avalanche, or wherever else blockchain. But I find myself with a problem that maybe my developers are not ready to build on the IC ecosystem, because maybe my developers, they're very good with Solidity, but they have no knowledge about Rust or Motoko. And I think this might be, for example, a kind of limitation, because if me as a founder, as a startup, I'm very keen to build on the IC, but then I find a limitation because my developers are not good, and I want to apply anyway for the grant, and maybe not start with 25K to 100K, but I start with something small, with a 5K, so that in this way, I will be able, to start to train in some way or help my developers to gain a little bit of knowledge on what they're going to expect. Because I'm imagining that if I don't have anyone in my team that it's good for doing this kind of development, if I go for 25K or 100K, I'm going to be rejected 100%. So maybe it will be smarter from my point of view to go for a 5K, but still, I have a limitation. I have a point of failure in all of this. But what would be a suggestion from your point of view as an expert developer that has successfully completed many grants for those startups, founders, entrepreneurs, early stage idea that are interested in the IC ecosystem, but there is that something missing for them to actually develop on the IC ecosystem?
That's a really great question, and I actually honestly, so I have spent a lot of time going to events, traveling around to live events, talking to a lot of people from other ecosystems, and I've received a lot of those very similar questions. So there is a platform, or I should say a framework out there that actually currently allows you to build smart contracts on the internet computer using TypeScript. So you can actually, a competent front-end developer could actually write backend smart contracts using Azel. It was developed by Demergent Labs and Jordan Last. And I use Azel quite a lot. I know a few others do in the ecosystem as well. And it's extremely useful because Motoko is a very new language. It's a great language. They did a great job with it, but it's new. It has great documentation, and so does the Internet Computer versions of Rust. The Rust Internet Computer docs are great, but so is Azel. And Azel is a way to bring standard web developers over to smart contract frameworks in a much easier way. And in my opinion, is one of the best ways to onboard developers, especially if they're not Rust and Motoko friendly. Then honestly, Azel might be one of your only bets. There's also Kybra, which is Python. So you can actually have a Python or TypeScript developer write smart contracts on the Internet Computer. And I will also be creating educational videos on how to onboard developers for these problems, because that is something that's very needed in the ecosystem right now, and something that I've had trouble with when finding junior developers to work on projects myself. So that is a really good question. I would honestly say start with the Azel framework, and if you're going to start with a small like 5K grant and then try to get it extended into a larger grant after you're done, I would say be honest with the foundation and the grant committee and let them know that you have some developers that are great smart contract developers that want to come in from another ecosystem, and you're learning to pick up a platform, and that you have competent developers that just need to take some time to get a grip on things, and they'll probably send you a good amount of resources. And then also there's plenty of OGs in the community who would be very happy to help with that.
Amazing. Really, thank you so much. I think this was really great answers as well. Thank you for all the suggestions you gave.
Thank you very much.
Before we wrap up our conversation, what kind of 3 advices would you give to startups when they're applying for Dev Grant?
I would say the first thing would be to make sure that what you want to do, to the best of your ability, make sure what you want to do is actually possible. Take a look at the tooling that's available, take a look at the open source stuff, take a look at the features, get a little bit of a grasp on the tooling like DFX and the things to launch a canister, practice launching some things if you're new, and get a grasp on the frameworks available so that you can try to make sure what you're asking for in the grant is possible. Another thing is, really think when you're designing your program through and through, no matter what size of grant, really try to think again, a big emphasis on what you need as a team and for a platform, what your main goal is, but also try to think, what can I give the ecosystem, specifically more or less an emphasis on open source code and infrastructure and tooling, because there are teams that get accepted and approved for platforms, games, and other things. But in my opinion, I've seen a lot more acceptance come from tooling and infrastructure. So that's a great way to start if you want to get involved. And also, it's a really great way to get affiliated with the backends of the Internet Computer and the functionalities that it can provide on the lowest down and dirty level, especially for newer teams. And then the third thing is, please reach out to people in the Dfinity developer Discord, reach out on the forums, in different Discords, on Twitter. You can find me, it's at Real Dan McCoy. Feel free to reach out. The Swap is another good entity. He's my partner. We've definitely taken to helping people. There's a ton of others though that will happily get you affiliated with either a developer or tooling or documentation, or be happy to offer some kind of dev assistance if needed. Really just stick with the community, because we're pretty tight knit.
Yeah, thanks. The Swap always helps. 100%.
Some of my favorite people here. I
At
talk to him
any time.
every day.
I don't know when
I
he
talk to him
sleeps
every
though,
day.
but he always helps. Well, that was a great workshop. I hope our startups will be able to learn and make notes regarding how to apply for perfect developer grant application. And I have more questions, but I think it's a different topic. So I'm hoping we can get you sometimes next time to ask you more questions in a mini workshop. And really, really appreciate. As we say here in Thailand, is Sawadika. Thank you very much for coming, spending your evening here and morning for Bruno. And I hope I will see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I have no problem helping out.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you guys.